I'm going to talk about conduct disorder today. And if you thought that Jaden's video, the first of the last two, was disturbing, you'll probably find this one disturbing, but also helpful in terms of thinking about and understanding what's going on with conduct disorder. You can also go on the internet. There's a fair amount about Beth available there. She and her family are really interested in reattachment therapy and argue that with Beth there has been a very positive outcome. And I think that's a hopeful thing, that there are things that we can do that can make a real difference. So what is conduct disorder? A repetitive, persistent pattern of behavior in which the basic rights of others are violated. At least 3 of these symptoms in the last 12 months, at least 1 in the last 6. So, aggression towards people and animals, often bullying, threatening, intimidating others, initiating physical fights, using a weapon that can cause serious physical harm to others, physically cruel to people, physically cruel to animals, stolen while confronting a victim, has forced someone into sexual activity. So with Beth, and this is the first of the symptoms, we know that she has forced her brother into sexual activity, been cruel to animals, cruel to people, bullying, threatening, intimidating others. Destruction of property, deliberately engaging in fire setting with the intention of causing serious damage, deliberately destroying others' property, broken into a house, building, or car, often lying to obtain goods or favors or avoid obligations, stolen items of non-trivial value without confronting a victim, often staying out at night despite parental prohibitions, running away from home, often truant. And these cause significant impairment in social and academic occupational functioning. If 18 years or older does not meet criteria for antisocial personality disorder, and remember that one of the risk factors for antisocial personality disorder was conduct disorder. So think about gender and age differences in conduct disorder. And you see that clearly more boys than girls are diagnosed with conduct disorder. Boys generally earlier and decrease with time. The blue, you see that girls peak in adolescence and drop off, later. So problems may have multiple causes, and we've been talking about this throughout the semester. Probably there's some biological piece, that more difficult children, more difficult to soothe, run into more difficulties. Family dysfunction, often a problem. Problems with teacher and student match, academic problems, dating problems, confusion about sexual orientation, and problems or GLBT youth are at much greater risk of suicide, and poor social skills. So how do you choose among these things? And I'm not sure that it's an either or. I think that what we want to be thinking about is, when is this, the most useful way? And recognize that a variety of different kinds of things can contribute, and that we can intervene in a variety of different ways. As we're thinking about school violence, one of the things that seems to be related to it is witnessing violence at home, in the community, and in the media. And so as a parent, one of the things you might want to consider doing is limiting the exposure to violence on TV and certainly within your family. The need for attention or respect that isn't being met in other ways. In our last video, we talked about the role of negative attention. If I can't get it for doing good things, then I'd rather do it for bad things. Feelings of poor self-worth, peer pressure, so watching who your kids are around, access to weapons, child abuse, child neglect. Now, these things double a boy's risk of becoming a murderer. So coming from a family with a history of criminal violence, being abused, belonging to a gang, abusing drugs or alcohol. And, none of these are real surprises, are they? These things triple a boy's risk of becoming a killer. Using a weapon, having been arrested, having had problems at school, having some sort of neurological problem that impairs thinking or feeling. One of the difficulties here is that violence is a low-frequency behavior. It's difficult to predict. It's difficult to predict suicide. And we tend to over-predict it. However, there are factors that increase or decrease those risks, and we should be monitoring those. So think about some of the risk factors at Columbine. These kids were members of the trenchcoat mafia, felt alienated and disrespected, had a history of arrests, were on probation, described how to make bombs on web pages, had threatened other students with a gun, and were enamored of the Nazi culture. On the other hand, I think it's very difficult to diagnose sometimes. Harris and Klebold came from good families, and they were excellent students, and very bright. So, for example, their probation officers described Eric as a very bright young man who's likely to succeed in life, intelligent enough to achieve lofty goals as long as he stays on task and remains motivated. And Dylan is a bright young man who has a great deal of potential. He is intelligent enough to make any dream a reality, but he needs to understand hard work is part of it. The difficulty is you can't really predict lethality well. It's easy when murderers look like Charlie Manson. It's harder when they look like Ted Bundy. And remember, Ted Bundy is a hillside strangler. Both of these kids were from good families. They were attractive kids, upper-class kids, bright kids. And one of the difficulties is that we tend to respond more positively to such kids. So the moral of our story is, while we can't predict violence accurately 100% of the time, there are factors that put teens at risk, and we can do things to decrease them. And most importantly, almost every child can profit from these interventions. So, for example, if you read Putnam's book, Our Kids, he makes a number of recommendations about what we can do for kids, for their families, for their communities, and any child, not just kids who are struggling. Any child could profit from these. So what can we do? We can reduce scapegoating and prejudice. We can help all students develop a healthy and realistic self-esteem, create primary prevention programs for children at risk of being abused, and intervene with them early. We can help find them mentors. So programs like Big Brother and Big Sister have good outcomes. Kids there generally do better. Recognize students' strengths as well as their weaknesses. We can teach anger management techniques. We can make guns unavailable to kids. We can identify students with mental health issues and get them help, take their threats seriously, recognize risk factors and get at-risk students help. And remember our tendency to excuse good kids or quiet kids. So what should you do now? Given today's discussion, think about what you would do to decrease violence at your child's school or at the local school. And think about some of your recommendations. How might those be consistent or inconsistent with our discussion? And take care.